more about colonialism. The first Elizabethan era ended when Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603. Her 45-year reign was, quote, a golden age, though I guess that kind of depends on your perspective, which marked England's emergence as an ambitious and ruthless global power. Elizabeth I heavily encouraged privateering, granting charters or trading and exploration rights to private companies, which paved the way for an intercontinental empire. It was she who gave Walter Raleigh permission to set up a small colony on Roanoke Island, Britain's first foray into the colonization of America. Now, centuries later, the second Elizabethan era has just ended with the death of Queen Elizabeth II. The two reigns invite easy comparison, and they are tethered by their unique positions in the timeline of British colonialism, the beginning and the beginning of the end. In the 1920s, the British Empire was at its zenith, ruling and controlling the natural resources and economic output of around a quarter of the world's entire population, about 413 million people at the time. All of these countries in red were controlled by the British Empire. You can see Canada, Australia, India, Ireland, much of Africa, just to name a few of the countries. To quote an often used phrase throughout the 18th and 20th centuries, the sun never sets on the British Empire. It literally meant that it was daylight somewhere around the globe in a place that Britain controlled. But nightfall for the empire was on the horizon by the time Elizabeth became queen, and it was ushered in by the colonized, not by the colonizer. In 1947, a few months after Queen Elizabeth II's 21st birthday, but 5 years before she became the monarch, Britain would lose one of its most crucial imperial possessions, India, and the newly partitioned Pakistan. For more than a century, Britain had exploited local rulers, workers, and resources in India, flooding the British economy with cotton and cash. India not only paved the way for Britain's massive global rise, but funded the continued progress of the Industrial Revolution. Remnants of colonialism in India continue in the conflict between India and Pakistan and India's continued colonization of Kashmir. And I don't need to make a metaphor here. The 105-carat Kohinoor diamond, which sits in one of the 3 royal consort crowns, is a spoil of war from India. As countless sought and achieved independence from England, many became members of the British Commonwealth, which was formed in 1949. Upon her death, Queen Elizabeth II remained the head of state of 15 Commonwealth nations who chose her as their head of state. 36 of those countries are now republics without a royal head of state. 5 have their own monarchs. While the Commonwealth is a clear vestige of colonialism, initially conceived as a consortium of white settler colonies like South Africa at the time, the Commonwealth was a vehicle to preserve Britain's global influence at a time when decolonization was getting more popular around the world. But really, it positioned Britain at the head of a massive school, teaching the former colonists how to behave and how to, in theory, self-govern. Through the lens of history, it's now often seen as patronizing, sometimes racist, including during the 12 years that apartheid South Africa was a member, and it's generally a superfluous thing and probably a waste of money. By the mid-1970s, the British Empire was reduced to little pockets around the world. When Hong Kong was transferred to China in 1997, the then Prince of Wales called it, quote, the end of empire. That prince is now King Charles III. Colonization, British or otherwise, was economic exploitation, violence, and racism. Decolonization, virtually never initiated by the British, was often a bloody and deadly fight for independence. Example after example. The U.S. Revolutionary War, the concentration camps established during the Boer Wars in South Africa, the massacre of hundreds of Sikh worshippers in Amritsar, India, in under 10 minutes, by the way, in 1919. The death of between 20,000 and 100,000 people in the Mau Mau uprising in my birthplace of Kenya in the 1950s, the Opium Wars with China, and lesser-known atrocities like civilian torture in Cyprus, the continued mess that is Israel and Palestine today. All of it is the legacy of British colonialism. Queen Elizabeth was widely respected and admired. But if you're having mixed feelings about the mourning of the Queen and the institution she represented for so many decades, that's valid, and you're not alone.